Welcome to today's lesson where we're going to discuss some of the basic principles of plasma exchange. And what we want to do today is determine when to use plasma exchange and why plasma exchange works the way it does. So let's start off with explaining what plasma exchange is all about. Plasma exchange allows you to eliminate anything that's in the plasma. And in particular, what you have in the plasma are immunoglobulins. And these are pathologic immunoglobulins. So you get an idea that plasma exchange or plasmapheresis is being used for medical conditions that are associated or caused by pathologic immunoglobulin production. And so there are four things that go into the concentration of an immunoglobulin. And let's talk about two of them right off the bat. The first we want to talk about is production. It's the production of these immunoglobulins by your white blood cells, which are causing the disease process to occur and to worsen. And then you have something called redistribution. It turns out that immunoglobulins are distributed quite broadly. They're not just found in the intravascular space, but they're also found in the extravascular space. So whatever you remove from the intravascular space is quickly replenished by what's in the extravascular space, and that's what I mean by redistribution. And now you have two therapies at your disposal. The first therapy, one to inhibit immunoglobulin production, is chemotherapy or immunomodulating agents. And the job of these medications is to decrease the production of immunoglobulins. And then you've got a second therapy, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and that's plasma exchange. So, in order for you to make a dent in the concentration of immunoglobulins, these two features, plasma exchange and chemotherapy, have to be stronger than the production and the redistribution. So 1 and 2 have to be greater in their effect than 3 and 4 if you're going to make any headway in decreasing immunoglobulin production. And because this is a little bit challenging to do, what you'll find is plasma exchange will have to be done over a long period of time. And the reason is as follows. This is the number of exchanges, and here is your concentration of immunoglobulin. And so you start off with a concentration up here, and you're producing a lot of immunoglobulins, and you're redistributing those immunoglobulins, but you're removing them with plasma exchange and chemotherapy. So after the first exchange, you drop down. Because you're still producing and redistributing between the first and second exchange, you pop back up. Hopefully you don't pop up back to the original level because you institute another plasma exchange at this point here. And drop back down again. Come back up, another plasma exchange, drop back down. And so the pattern that you see is like this. And each drop corresponds with a successive round of plasma exchange. This graph is why you do multiple plasma exchanges over the course of consecutive days or every other day, because you have this production and redistribution that you're trying to overcome using your plasma exchange and or any adjunctive chemotherapy. So let's talk about the types of plasma exchanges that you can do, because there are two main types. So if you want to do plasma exchange, you're going to have to specify the type of exchange that you want. Now this may be already defined for you based on your institution, but if you're at an institution that does both, you want to know the pros and cons of each feature. So you've got centrifugation as a method of choice for plasma exchange, or you've got membrane permeability. Alright, so let's talk about centrifugation first, because this is the method of plasma exchange that's most commonly used in the United States. Centrifugation basically works as follows. You're taking some serum from the patient and you're spinning it, and you're separating the components based on their density. Of course, the plasma will have the least density, followed by platelets and then red blood cells, and then white blood cells. So when you separate based on density, you're going to have a layer that's just plasma, and it's that layer that you're going to discard. Now, centrifugation allows you to do some other things with plasma exchange, and namely, you can do what's called cytophoresis. Cytophoresis is simply the elimination of a specific type of cell because you're using centrifugation. So for example, if you have someone with hyperviscosity syndrome because they have a lot of white blood cells, centrifugation would be a method of plasma exchange that you'd want to use because you'd be able to separate the white blood cells from all the other good stuff, the red blood cells, the platelets, and the plasma itself. So centrifugation not only allows you to eliminate plasma, but it allows you to eliminate any cell that you desire. Now, centrifugation it's more of a favorable type of plasma exchange because it requires low blood flows. And that's represented as QB, or blood flow. So low blood flows means you don't necessarily have to have a central line, and that's what's critical about this step. You can use a peripheral venous line, and that's great because you don't have to subject the patient to the morbidity of a central line insertion, and you don't have to delay in initiating centrifugation plasma exchange because it's easy to put in a PVL compared to a CVL. So that's centrifugation. Now let's talk about the second type, or second method of plasma exchange, and membrane permeability. So in membrane permeability, you've got something very similar to dialysis, and let me explain what that means. You're running your blood through a filter in which there is a membrane that allows certain components to pass through, and those components are generally the immunoglobulins. So there's a membrane, and it's semi-permeable, and it allows certain components to pass through. And so it's large enough, so the pores are large enough to allow proteins and immunoglobulins to pass. Now, membrane permeability turns out to be a more efficient way of eliminating plasma proteins or deleterious immunoglobulins than centrifugation. So this is more effective when you want to perform a true plasma exchange. There is two major limitations for membrane permeability. One has to do with the membrane itself. The membrane is large enough to allow immunoglobulins to pass, but not large enough to allow any cells to pass. So you cannot perform any cytophoresis. Say, for example, you have that patient with hyperviscosity syndrome. Membrane permeability would be the bad method to use to treat that patient because you wouldn't be able to get rid of any of the cells, whether they're platelets, white blood cells, or red blood cells. And the second limiting factor of membrane permeability is that it's similar to dialysis, which means it requires high blood flows. And high blood flows means you cannot use a PVL. You need to have a central venous line. So you have to expose the patient to the morbidity of a central venous insertion, and there's a delay in initiating membrane permeability because it takes some time to get the central line in. But if you have a patient who has a disease where there's abnormal immunoglobulins in the plasma and you want it to be the most efficient at executing plasma exchange, membrane permeability, if available at your hospital, would be the better option than centrifugation. If, however, you have a patient who has too many or deleterious amount of white blood cells or red blood cells, for example, you'd want to use cytophoresis, which can only be accomplished through centrifugation. So you can see that centrifugation would be the better choice in most hospitals because not only do you get the cytophoresis option, but you can still get some plasma exchange by density. So this is the option that gives you the most flexibility. It's probably why it's most commonly used in the United States. And this is a simple introduction to plasma exchange. Thank you very much.